Something strange happens whenever people talk about Julius Caesar's assassination. We all know the basic story. March 5, 10th, 44 BCE. The Senate chamber, a group of senators stabbing the most powerful man in Rome. But when you look deeper into the timeline, the motives, and the political reality of the late Roman Republic, contradictions start appearing everywhere. Caesar pardoned his enemies, but they killed him. The senators claimed they were saving the Republic, but the Republic collapsed immediately afterward. Rome supposedly wanted to protect freedom, yet the people mourned Caesar, not his killers. And perhaps the most confusing part, the conspirators insisted Caesar was becoming a tyrant. Yet there is almost no evidence that Caesar ever declared himself as such. In this video, we are going to break all of this down step by step. We're going to examine the political environment of Rome before Caesar came to power, the intentions behind his reforms, the fears inside the Senate, and the real motivations behind the conspiracy. You will see quotations from Roman historians, facts from Caesar's own writings, and the actions of his allies and enemies. By the end, you might feel that the assassination was not simply an act of heroism or treason, it was a desperate attempt by a collapsing political class to save itself from irrelevance. Let's begin. Rome before Caesar was a republic only in name. For decades, the Senate was trapped in endless corruption, internal violence, and financial collapse. Ordinary Romans were suffering from unemployment, debt, and food shortages, while a handful of wealthy families controlled everything. Political office had become a weapon to enrich oneself. Elections were bought with bribes. Senators formed private armies. Rival politicians murdered each other on the streets of Rome. The Republic was dying long before Caesar even entered the scene. When Caesar rose to power, he inherited this broken system. His popularity came from very real public frustration. He built alliances with Pompey and Crassus, the first triumvirate, not to destroy the Republic, as his enemies later claimed, but because political deadlock made it impossible to pass reforms. Caesar wanted land redistribution, debt relief, military support for veterans, and grain subsidies. These ideas were extremely dangerous for the wealthy elite because they threatened their power. From the moment Caesar began pushing reforms in 59 BCE, the Senate saw him as a threat, not because he was a tyrant, but because he challenged their monopoly. When Caesar went to Gaul, everything changed. His 8 years of campaigns made him the most successful general in Roman history, bringing immense wealth to Rome and tremendous loyalty from his armies. But the Senate was terrified. Ancient historian Sallust wrote that senators feared Caesar would strip them of their privileges. So they tried to remove him by ordering him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, where he could be easily arrested. Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon wasn't an act of ambition, it was an act of survival. He famously said, "The die is cast," but his letters reveal a more complex motive. He believed his enemies were preparing his destruction, and he had no choice but to defend himself. The civil war that followed was brutal, but Caesar's behavior after victory shocked everyone. Instead of executing his enemies as Sulla, a previous dictator, had done, Caesar pardoned them. This included Brutus, Cassius, Cicero, and dozens of senators who fought against him. Some historians argue this mercy was Caesar's biggest mistake. The people he spared ultimately became the people who murdered him. Ancient biographer Suetonius wrote that Caesar's clemency was interpreted as weakness, and it encouraged his enemies to conspire again. Meanwhile, Caesar's political actions after the war reveal a very different picture from the tyrant. Propaganda later spread by his assassins. He reduced taxes in provinces where governors were exploiting the population. He passed laws to prevent corruption in elections. He introduced the Julian calendar, which is still the foundation of the modern calendar today. He expanded citizenship rights, boosted grain supplies, increased Senate membership to represent more regions of Rome, and launched massive building programs to create jobs. For ordinary people, Caesar was the only leader addressing real problems. This explains why he enjoyed overwhelming public support. But these reforms also weakened the Senate's ancient powers. Many senators felt humiliated, especially when Caesar accepted honors like Father of the Nation, had statues of himself placed among Rome's gods, and allowed coins to be minted with his image, something no Roman alive had ever done. Whether Caesar encouraged these honors, tolerated them, or simply did not resist them remains unclear. Some sources claim he refused the title of king multiple times. Others claim he secretly desired unlimited power. Ancient historian Cassius stated that many of the honors were offered by senators who hoped to trap Caesar into appearing like a monarch, giving them justification to remove him. By early 44 BCE, tensions reached their peak. Caesar accepted the role of dictator for life, a title that sounded ominous even if it didn't technically mean permanent monarchy. Rome had a deep cultural hatred of kingship, dating back to the expulsion of its last king in 509 BCE. Even the possibility that Caesar wanted to become king was enough to ignite fear. Yet ironically, there is no clear evidence that Caesar ever proclaimed himself king. The famous crown incident, where Mark Antony publicly offered Caesar a crown and Caesar refused it, is one of the strongest pieces of evidence that Caesar did not want the title. So if Caesar wasn't officially trying to become king, why did the senators believe or pretend to believe that he was a tyrant? One reason was political jealousy. Caesar had taken direct control of decision-making. Senators who once enjoyed near absolute control found themselves sidelined. Many lost their influence, wealth, and ability to manipulate the system. Even Brutus and Cassius, the supposed defenders of liberty, were former supporters of Pompey who had benefited immensely from the old system. Their vision of the Republic was not the democratic ideal we imagine today, but a return to a system where only a few elite families controlled the state. The conspiracy formed slowly, but the core group included men Caesar had trusted and forgiven. Many had served under him. Some owed their careers to him. They met in private homes to discuss the future of Rome. Most ancient sources agree on one thing. The conspirators feared that Caesar planned to lead a war against Parthia, and once he left Rome with his legions, he would return even more powerful. Killing him before he departed seemed the only chance to restore their version of the Republic. But even within the conspiracy there were doubts. Some wanted to kill Mark Antony as well, believing that Caesar's second-in-command posed an equal threat. Brutus refused, insisting that their goal was to kill a tyrant, not commit mass murder. This moral argument would later be seen as naive, because sparing Antony allowed him to destroy the conspirators in the months that followed. On the morning of March 15th, 44 BCE, the Ides of March, Caesar was warned by soothsayers and even by written notes handed to him in the street. But he ignored them all. Whether out of confidence, carelessness, or the belief that his enemies would never dare attack him, Caesar walked into the Senate chamber unprotected. The building was temporary, Pompey's old theater, because the main Senate building was still under reconstruction. That is the tragic irony. Caesar died at the foot of a statue of Pompey, his former ally turned enemy. The attack was brutal but disorganized. Caesar was surrounded, stabbed repeatedly, and collapsed in shock. Whether he said, "Et tu, Brute?" is historically doubtful. Shakespeare invented the phrase. Plutarch records that Caesar pulled his toga over his head when he saw Brutus approaching, not because he uttered dramatic words, but because he could not bear to die exposed. The conspirators thought the people of Rome would celebrate the death of a tyrant. Instead, they fled the city as mobs erupted in anger. That reaction alone challenges everything the conspirators claimed. If Caesar had truly been a tyrant, Rome should have celebrated his death. Instead, ordinary Romans gathered around his body, weeping, screaming, and demanding justice. Mark Antony's funeral speech ignited fury. Citizens lifted Caesar's blood-stained cloak in public. His body was burned in the Forum. In the chaos that followed, the Republic the conspirators tried to save collapsed permanently. Yet as the conspirators prepared for their decisive blow, the situation around them was shifting in ways they could not fully understand. Rome was not the same republic that existed a century earlier, when the Senate truly commanded the loyalty of the people and held unquestioned authority. Caesar had disrupted that balance. But the conspirators misread something crucial: how deeply the common people had grown tired of elite squabbling and endless aristocratic power games. The republic the senators hoped to restore was something the average Roman no longer believed in or no longer benefited from. But inside the Senate, they convinced themselves that the citizens would rally behind them once Caesar was gone. Their belief was shaped by memory, nostalgia, and a long-standing cultural myth that Rome was always united in defense of the old order. They had no idea how quickly this assumption would collapse after the assassination. Still, the final steps were put in place. According to later accounts, several conspirators had been having doubts. Decimus Brutus had to convince Caesar to attend the Senate meeting that morning, because he was reluctant due to disturbing dreams reported by his wife Calpurnia. Plutarch even implies that nature itself seemed to resist the coming axe storms, strange animal behavior, rumors spreading through the streets. Whether or not these omens were real, they reveal something interesting. Many in Rome sensed that the city was on the edge of something irreversible. And yet Caesar went. When he arrived, the senators surrounded him. The signal was given. The first stab came from Casca, clumsy and unsure. Then dozens followed. Caesar fell beneath a storm of blades, 23 wounds delivered by some of the most educated, elite men in Rome. The symbolism was unmistakable. This was not a lone assassin. This was the establishment itself tearing down the man who threatened to rewrite the nature of political power. But here is where the story becomes even more interesting and more ironic. The conspirators expected applause. They imagined crowds erupting in celebration, the Senate reclaiming its dignity, the Republic restored in an instant. Instead, Rome froze. Confusion swept through the streets. Fear spread. People ran home and locked their doors. Whatever the senators had expected, the people delivered silence, one of the most dangerous forces in politics. And in that silence emerged the real consequences. Mark Antony saw his opportunity immediately. A shrewd political survivor, he understood something the conspirators didn't. Caesar's death did not automatically restore the Republic. It created a vacuum that only the strongest would fill. Antony used Caesar's will, especially the gifts Caesar left for the Roman citizens, to turn public opinion violently against the assassins. Then came Octavian, Caesar's 18-year-old adopted heir, quiet but calculating. He presented himself as the defender of Caesar's legacy and the friend of the people. The conspirators found themselves politically stranded. Within months, they were fleeing Rome. Within 2 years, most were dead, hunted down in Greece, Macedonia, and Asia Minor. The republic they claimed to defend was overwhelmed by the rise of the Second Triumvirate. The Roman world moved closer to what the conspirators feared most: a hereditary monarchy under a single ruler. So what does this tell us about the central question? Was Caesar's assassination a political necessity or a catastrophic miscalculation disguised as heroism? When we examine the evidence, the answer becomes more complicated than the traditional story suggests. Yes, the conspirators acted in defense of something real. A republic already weakened by decades of civil war, corruption, and inequality. They believed, perhaps sincerely, that Caesar's growing power represented the final nail in its coffin. But sincerity isn't the same as insight. The mistake wasn't their intention, it was their strategy. First, they tried to defend the Republic with the tools of an older age, ignoring the new political reality. Caesar's popularity among soldiers and citizens had already outgrown the Senate's authority. Killing him could not reverse that shift. Second, they offered no plan for what came next. Removing a powerful figure without constructing an alternative vision is a blueprint for chaos. And finally, they misunderstood what the people truly wanted. Rome's poor, its veterans, its working classes, these groups had gained more from Caesar than from any Senate decree. Why would they celebrate his removal? This is where the possibility becomes clearer. the assassination may not have been a political necessity at all. It may have been an elite reaction to losing influence, cloaked in noble language about saving the Republic. Caesar was reshaping Rome, yes. But he was doing so because Rome had become too large, too complex, and too fragmented for its old political system. The Republic was already collapsing under its own weight long before Caesar arrived. He simply accelerated the transformation. If the senators had found a political solution, instead of a violent one, perhaps a negotiated power-sharing arrangement, or legal constraints or a gradual restructuring, Rome might have avoided the brutal civil wars that followed. But once they chose assassination, there was no going back. The tragedy is that the conspirators achieved the opposite of what they intended. By killing Caesar, they made him a martyr. They gave his successors moral legitimacy. They ignited the chain of events that ultimately produced the Roman Empire. Augustus Caesar's adopted son became the first emperor of Rome, wielding more authority than Caesar ever did. The Senate survived only as a ceremonial institution. So Caesar's assassination necessary? Or did it merely hasten a transformation that was already underway? Historians today often argue that political violence rarely stabilizes a failing system. It usually destroys whatever remains of it. Caesar was not the only cause of Rome's collapse. He was a symptom of it, a product of decades of instability, warlordism, and inequality. Killing him did not remove the disease. It only removed the man who, for better or worse, was trying to manage it. In the end, Caesar's assassination serves as one of history's most powerful warnings. When a political class becomes too disconnected from the population it claims to represent, its attempts to restore order can backfire catastrophically. When leaders respond to change with violence instead of negotiation, they often unleash forces they cannot control. And when ambition, fear, and nostalgia combine, even the most intelligent elites can push their nation toward collapse. What Brutus, Cassius, and the others saw as a heroic act of defense may have been the final step in the Republic's downfall. And perhaps that is the real lesson. Sometimes the event meant to save a system becomes the thing that destroys it. Caesar's death did not preserve the Republic. It buried it.